All right. So you just were in the alumni panel, and we've got one more 5x5 tonight. So again, we've tried to take the best parts of a conference and put them into a virtual conference. And I think one of the best parts of a conference is getting to meet interesting people quickly. And so how we've tried to simulate this in this virtual environment is this 5x5. So across the entire forum, spread across all the days, we're going to have 5 different conversations, asking 5 people 5 interesting questions, about 10 minutes of Q&A for each. And tonight we have Mike Kelly. Mike, you wear a ton of different hats, which is interesting. And I'm going to try to cover a couple of those different hats with you. But let's start with the company that you co-founded, Startup Competitors. Maybe before I get into it, give us the elevator pitch on Startup Competitors.
Yeah, so Startup Competitors is a market research firm for early stage companies, and we're mid-pivot right now, where we're moving towards a weekly or monthly human-curated email, which would summarize the most interesting information and changes that are happening on the top 3 competitors in your market.
Great. And you also do work with large companies in your DeveloperTown role. And so I'm curious, what do you think large companies most misunderstand when evaluating the competitive landscape of a new startup?
You fed me this question earlier, and I've been thinking about this one all day. And I don't know that I would frame it as that they misunderstand the landscape necessarily. I think our experience is that in a lot of times you'll find pockets within the company that I do think deeply understand the landscape, understand what the competition is doing, understand what their users want. I think the challenge in a large company is getting that alignment across the organization where you can then act on it in a way that you want. Yep. Or in a way that you can be effective. I think that's probably the biggest issue, is finding the people inside the company who do understand these things, and which is, often the people closest to the problems, and then getting them listened to in the ways that need to be within other parts of the organization to make stuff happen. I also didn't want to just do a cop out. If I did have to pick one thing, it would potentially be how fast the landscape changes. Today, you can look in a market like, hey, let's go launch a new financial service product for X. And today there's nothing there. And literally 4 months later, there might be 5 of them.
Yep. Awesome. Okay. So speaking of this, again, this work with large companies, right? I think one of the things a lot of large companies struggle with is, what do they outsource versus what do they bring in-house? And you're one of the groups that they can outsource to. So how do you think about what should be outsourced versus what should be brought in-house in terms of innovation?
Think of this as a bit of a pendulum or a dichotomy. So on one end, you have what's your competitive edge as a company? What's the thing that you need to be the best in the world at that makes you completely unique and special that nobody else in your industry can do as well as you? And then on the other end, there's everything else that you do, which is probably accounts receivable, human resources, like all the other things that need to happen to run a business. And so for us, at least, when we think about where are we best situated to help you when it comes to innovation, a lot of the value we're going to bring to the table comes from the deep specialization we have in technology, not necessarily in our industry. We can take what we've learned applying a technology in 5 different industries or verticals, and then come into your industry for the first time and share all that learning with you, and things that probably don't have to do with your competitive edge for the most part. But there are things that are maybe new to you, applied new in your vertical or in your context, that can be really transformative. And I think when you look at a lot of the more innovative things that large companies do in kind of that mid-tier project range, not where you're launching a whole new line of business, but where you just want to come in and do some transformational change, in a lot of cases, it's taking those learnings from other industries and bringing them into yours.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so we're going to keep moving around the different hats of Mike. And you were also really early in GovTech, starting Waterly. And I guess just when I think about Waterly, right, like utility that's helping these folks out. But how do you think GovTech maybe more broadly is changing because of COVID?
Yeah, so GovTech has to deal with all the things we all have to deal with during COVID. So telecommuting, remote employee engagement, culture, better process visibility, all those same problems we have, they have. Their offices got closed too. And in some cases, they're first ones back into the office because they had to, just for essential services and stuff like that. So I think they have all of those challenges. On the Waterly side, I think we're riding a different trend that is accelerated A lot of people would say COVID hasn't changed a ton of things so much as accelerated a bunch of change that was already queued up and
Yeah.
probably needed to happen anyway. And I think you see that in GovTech as well. So this need for real-time visibility of the system, what's happening, better redundancy, not as much paper, because if there's nobody in an office, there's nobody to push paper. We were on an early trend of that with Waterly. And I think today, when we look at the landscape, look at our peers and accelerators and things like that, we see a lot of that continuing with other parts that previously weren't digitized that now you see software moving into very, very quickly.
Okay. That's awesome. And now let's finish with a fun one. So you also run a hobby farm. Your family runs a hobby farm, and it's
We do.
if you haven't checked this out, you guys should check out Mike's podcast on life on the hobby farm. But what's your craziest family farm story?
Did I send you the podcast for the farm? I'm so sorry.
No, it's on. I was sort of, when we were prepping for our conversation, I went to your thing, and it was great. I love like young kids' view into entrepreneurship. It was actually magical. So,
all right, awesome. So struggle with this one as well. So we've done, I'm just going to hit some quick ones and I'll pick my favorite. So
right.
This year we delivered baby sheep for the first time, which was crazy. Our kids were involved in it. It was totally awesome. Last year we had a pig have a stroke, which is a whole like episode of House that unfolded over 3 weeks to try to figure that out. If anybody has ever had goats, you know that they get out and you have to chase them all over your neighborhood, which is amazing. But the favorite one is a handful of years ago, we raised turkeys. And a handful of years ago, we would wake up every morning and come out and find a dead turkey, which is not all that fun, except over the course of a handful of days, we figured out that it was an owl that was coming out at night to kill the turkeys. The last night that this happened, all the turkeys escaped, got out. They were in the woods. My family then had to go hunt them for literally miles and herd them all the way back to our property, which you can do. Turkeys will follow you. They're kind of like puppies, and to get them back to the pasture.
That's awesome. I posted a link into your kind of personal homepage so people can find the podcast, because we had at least one person who wanted a link to the podcast there. All right. So again, this is a chance for you to hear interesting people's stories quickly. We're going to go ahead and move now to the happy hour piece of that. And so we'll close this out and then we will turn on the happy hour piece. So here we go.